Rock music fans all over the world are in mourning today. Jim Morrison, lead singer of The Doors, was found dead in his Paris apartment this morning. French authorities attribute the cause of death to a heart attack. Morrison was...
Page with Paul Bean, another VDC TV Creemee Cast of Friday at 4. So, wow, great intro music, Paul.
Well, I was inspired from this morning.
That's right. Well, speaking of this morning, we were on WDEV this morning. I got an email from Kevin Ellis, who normally does Vermont Viewpoint on Fridays, saying, hey, I'm going to be out of town. Would you mind subbing? So I said, sure. And I emailed Paul, hey, Paul, tomorrow, WDEV, what do you say? And he said, absolutely. So we had a good time. And
it was a blast.
And they used some of this intro buffer music, I think they call it, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Buffer. I think it was buffer.
Yeah, buffer. I think that's it. And including some Jim Morrison music.
Yeah, that's right.
And The Doors. That's right. Which, by the way, I had the album for Riders on the Storm when it came out.
Sky, were you a hippie?
No, I wasn't, but I did. Everyone liked to listen to The Doors back then, and saw them on the Ed Sullivan Show and all that sort of thing. So, and speaking of kind of the old days and WDEV, you go in there and you cannot help but be reminded of Ken Squire, who passed away recently, owned WDEV basically his whole life, he and his father. And he was also a famous NASCAR announcer, founder of Thunder Road up in Barrie, just a local legend and a great guy.
That's right.
And as it turned out, you have a story about Ken Squire.
That I do. I can tell you as a young man, as a kid, really, and really even younger, as a real little guy, we used to do car shows here at Bean Chevrolet every spring. I think it was the first weekend or maybe the third weekend in May, we'd do a car show, and we would invite, of course, all people from all over the state, and we'd advertise with WDEV, and we really made quite a show of it. And I have here a photo of Ken standing outside what was Bean Chevrolet, but is now Bean Studios. So here's Ken, and actually unfortunately, I don't know the name of the other gentleman there with him. I feel guilty for not knowing that. But, yeah, they used to come down and do quite a show. And, I didn't know Ken. I met him a handful of times, especially in the last few years. But when I was a young kid, I met him too. But I can't really say that I knew him, although my family did. And he knew them quite well. So pretty cool to have him down here. And I found this picture as I've been cleaning this place out and making it into a studio. As you can see here today, we are in the third and I think final rendition, at least with what I have so far. Maybe we'll get these car keys out of here.
Oh, I think that's cool. I like
You like that?
Well, I just want a flag behind me.
I know that.
I want another flag.
I think we can make that happen,
well,
Guy. I think we can make that. But anyway, so we've been putting this place together, and I think we finally found what works. I'm pretty happy with the lighting and the camera angles and everything. We're getting there. This is the best it's been so far. So anyway, it was cool to go to WDEV today and hang out with them there, and just really go on the radio. I mean, what a blast, right?
Yes. Yeah. I walk in there wanting to sing the WKRP theme song. Oh, you probably don't know what
I
that
don't
was.
know what that is.
Well, that was an old show about a radio, and it was really funny, and it had a great theme song, and I was sort of, baby, if you've ever wondered, as I'm walking up the steps of WKRP. So anyway, enough on us and our radio reminiscences. Today, boy, is there a lot of news this week.
Oh, yeah.
Big news, including some that was broken, national news, really, by now, broken in the Vermont Daily Chronicle by our intrepid reporter, Mike Donahue. So the three big stories this week, we'll talk about them all. Plattergate, and that's where, and also the House Speaker spurning the governor's property tax relief program, and the state's biggest solar power company, its parent firm, collapsing into bankruptcy, just days before the legislature votes on entrenching solar power as the future of in-state electricity generation. Plattergate, first of all. Well, Burlington Mayor Emma Mulvaney Stanek, it was reported in the Vermont Daily Chronicle this week, is receiving home delivery of free meals prepared by her supporters. Now, you need to remember that the mayor and her spouse, who is a well-paid city employee, earn $250,000 between the two of them. It works like this. Using mailtrain.com, the organizers, a lobbyist named Jessica Oski, and a former city councilor named Rachel Siegel, have arranged for people to deliver meals to the home of the mayor and her spouse and their two children. And Mike Donahue broke this story for us. And it's just one of these things where, the organizers and the mayor herself say, well, working moms need every bit of help that they can get to do their jobs, to feed their families. But some of our commenters, well, let's be honest, most of our commenters,
Pretty much all of them.
and most of the hundreds and hundreds on Reddit, once we posted the story there, oh yeah, they had some things to say. Most of our commenters really weren't quite so sure that this was a great idea. The story went viral. And Paula, you have some examples there for it.
I do. So I've pulled up some comments from the Chronicle. I think this was today's article. And I don't have everybody's names listed here. I was trying to kind of keep that, I know it's when you post to the Chronicle, you kind of know that it might be seen by people. But here's one of the comments, and this is a good one. They write, be it entitlement, privilege, or whatever catchphrase one chooses, it certainly defines the typical virtue signaling Burlington progressive, as Miss Mayor is benefiting from the charity of her supporters. It is difficult to comprehend how Miss Mayor could explain herself and her actions to the residents at any of Burlington Housing Authority buildings, particularly Decker Towers. Exactly how would she explain free meals for her family to Burlington's much vaunted homeless residents by explaining she has magnanimously bequeathed them dumpsters and portable toilets? Oh, that's a very funny way to put that. And there's a reply from Ellen Anderson. She writes, when I first saw the headline, I thought the mayor and her spouse were cooking free meals for the poor in Burlington. And I thought, why would anyone object? LOL.
No, read the fine print.
If only.
That's not what happened.
If only. I do have a handful more. I think I pulled up like four total. Let's keep them going here. Mulvaney Stanek, you are a public servant. That means you serve the public. I am an alderman myself, and I get nothing from my constituents, food, money, or whatever. I serve them. My son asked me when I won my seat, Dad, what can you get away with now? I gave him a disgusted look and said, less than before, and that was nothing. If you can't serve honorably, step down. And Neil Johnson writes in reply, interesting conversations. Clearly, you're leading the family in the correct direction. However, it's also clear how much society has taken hold of our youth and your son and what is considered acceptable behavior. Great example. Too bad our schools and churches are not backing you up.
One of my concerns here, first of all, I guess bottom line, on the face of it, I don't have a huge problem with people who are friends of a family sort of organizing to provide meals. It's like, well,
yeah, sure.
Okay. But it's sort of what could happen. I'm not saying is happening, but what could happen if this thing became sort of institutionalized, and particularly it's the lobbyist angle, Paul, that concerns me. And I'm not worried about Jessica Oskey, who
No.
I know from the State House, and she's a great person, Burlington resident, very involved in the city sort of advocacy world, strong supporter of Mulvaney Stanek, and someone who kind of helped get the ball rolling here on this meal train stuff. And she is also a leading lobbyist on the state's most influential lobbying group, Necrason Group. They have dozens of clients, including many with the city of Burlington. And I'm not saying this is happening. I don't think she would let this happen.
Yeah.
Okay? That's not where I'm going with this. What I do worry about is that if this sort of practice spreads and it becomes kind of an expected thing, then other lobbyists could actually use this to try to curry favor. They say that the way to a man's heart is through his stomach. What better way to get in the good graces of a working woman than to support her family? And really, it's just could conceivably be like a quick, easy, cheap in with powerful people.
Sure.
Like the mayor of Burlington. So one of the reasons why they do have ethics laws that say, you really can't accept gifts and presents because they may be well intended, but they may also eventually be abused. So
Well, and that's just it. We were talking about this earlier, and I think I was saying something like, they're defending themselves, and I get what they're saying. Like I can understand their thinking. Like I understand why they think it's okay. I've been around enough people in Burlington and while I was in school at UVM, and just the way that they're thinking, I don't think it's necessarily entirely nefarious. However, like you say, how long down the road does this go institutionally, and thinking like, okay, maybe not her, and I'm not saying this is her, but I own a restaurant and I have a permitting problem. Hey, you know what? Every Tuesday night I'm going to hook you up with a meal train, and maybe could you help me out with that permitting problem? Whatever it is. And I think we've been pretty hard on Emma, right? I think we have been, and rightfully so. And I just don't think she's going that direction, but that's the concern. That's why people are so upset about it. And I think that's what's relevant and why it's such an interesting story, not just of Vermonters, but people all over the country. And Vermonters, from what I've seen, like 90% of people are like, this is ridiculous. This is absolutely ridiculous.
Can you tell if our friend Kevin Ryan is watching?
I can't tell, but we can ask. Kevin, if you're out there, chime in.
Right.
Let us know.
Because he's one of the people I know who knows who said the statement, the very true statement, with great power comes great responsibility.
That's right.
Right?
It's very true.
And Kevin, if you're listening, chime in and let us know, okay? Speaking of comments, do we have any?
We do have quite a few, and I also have a couple more loaded, but I'd rather read right here from the...
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah, so first of all, Olga Maria writes, nice intro, thank you. We tested that out. We wanted to see how that went. Probably going to keep doing something like that. And she also writes, if you can't meal plan for your family with that income, how can you be trusted to run a city? Well, maybe she's too busy running the city. But I guess the point is get your home in order before you start going out.
Whoa.
Right?
Where
That's
have
a
we
very
heard that before?
Jordan Petersonian
Yes.
take, and not just his, of course. Carl Jung it's a very philosophical, important point. If you can't, clean your room or make yourself dinner, what business do you have telling other people how they should be living? Or that's just I get it. Big Siege writes, I have a lot of friends in the progressive category, 30 to 40 age bracket. It's common for them to ask for money through services like Meal Train. And I say most are better off than me, I don't think. I'm surprised to hear that this is a normal thing, I guess. And that's what I mean. It's like I could see in their world that this is like it's part of their worldview. It's part of their ideology, if you will.
Huh.
Do you know what I'm saying?
Wow.
Well,
that's a little insight into a world that I don't live in.
Let's see here. Big Siege also writes, it's nefarious. I think it's their communal ideology. Yep. I can't read that comment. I don't know if that's fair representation.
If you have any doubts.
That's right. Mike King writes, swayed by a couple quarts of Al's French fries, Vermont small potatoes. Now that is a good comment right there. That's a good one.
I will do almost anything for a couple quarts of Al's French fries.
Big Siege writes, clean your damn room, Jordan Peterson. Well, anyhow, Big Siege also writes, I don't think it's nefarious. Correction. Okay, so to their point of these 30 to 40 range progressives, maybe with kids, this is something that they do, I guess. This is part of their life. I don't know.
And you know, if it's voluntary and they're being part of community and they're supporting each other, I mean, that's what churches do. That's one of the great things. Like when
it's a good point.
When my late wife died, I had all sorts of food in my fridge. Because our church, it's just what they do.
Yeah.
You know? And that's wonderful. But I did not ever say, I publish a newspaper and I've got these two little kids at home. And frankly, if you're one of my advertisers or you want some good coverage in the city council, well, I have a fridge on the back porch and I'd love to see some food in that. Which isn't to say that she did this. This was someone else doing this for her.
That's right.
But still.
No, I think as an elected official, you're held to a different standard, too.
Right.
Like you're the mayor of Burlington.
Yeah.
Why should you be getting free meals from people? You should be giving free meals.
Right.
I just think that's but that is it's an interesting point that, the churches and communities, like people take care of each other. And I guess that's their thinking on it. I guess the optics of it, especially as a Burlington mayor, it just seems wrong. And actually, that brings me to a comment that I do have loaded up. Somebody wrote, this is about community support in quotation marks. Is there any idea or concept Progressive comes up with or enjoins that cannot be enhanced by putting the word community along with it? Also, the Woodchuck Cider product placement is obviously a cheap shot at Citizen Cider, who now reside in the shunned nether regions of cancel culture because they marketed a product towards people who mow their lawns. Yes, I actually saw this photo of Emma, and I thought the same thing of her and her wife. I said, I wonder if that has anything to do with maybe it doesn't. Let's not. We don't know. We don't know. And there's one final comment I want to read from our writers, our viewers online on our articles. She writes, hey, Mayor, my daughter is a single mom. She works on a farm and gets up at 3:30 in the morning, does milking, helps hay, mend fences, etc. She makes less than an eighth of your salary, and she doesn't get any free meal and no government help. She doesn't want any assistance. Why? Because she is a true Vermonter, and she has long days but doesn't complain. If you as mayor think you deserve this, then you are selfish, and it truly pisses me off. Well,
I'd say that woman working on the farm didn't have a poli-sci degree from Smith College either, Paul.
She might not.
Yeah.
She might not. I think it's just it's kind of an important point. It's like, why do you think that this is something that you're entitled to, and that the pushback from the people?
And that is true. Her response has been, well, I work really hard and I'm trying to help out people, and she could have just said, you know what, boy, you're right. There's people who need this so much more than we do, folks. Thank you so much, but why don't you do the same for the food shelf? Could have just said that.
Yes.
Didn't say that.
No, she doubled down.
Right.
Which we live in a culture of doubling down. I'm guilty of it myself, but maybe that's enough on that subject. You want to move on?
So, speaking of farms, we perhaps have beaten that dead horse enough.
Yes, I think so.
Next up, there was about a 29-minute window on Wednesday, and it looked like maybe we might not get hosed on tax relief. So here's what happened. That hope we had, and Paul, I was sitting here watching this press conference, and you were sitting right next to me here at our adjunct Chronicle office down here in Northfield, and the governor at 2:30 said, okay, right now we're looking at a 13.8% tax hike for property taxes. if we do 5 things, we can get this down to 4 to 6%. Manageable. Arguably the growth of inflation, the growth of the economy. Not a bad thing.
What were some of those things?
First of all, cutting $20 million in the universal school meals.
Okay.
Which wouldn't cut out school meals for the kids. All it would do is it would revert to a federal program where there's essentially a needs test, where if you're super wealthy, you don't automatically get free no-bake cookies and hamburgers. Okay, and that's a system that really worked fine until the COVID money came along and said, boy, why don't we just make sure everyone has a free breakfast and a free lunch, even if they don't necessarily really want it or need it. So they could do that. There was also some surplus money hanging around. There was some reserve money hanging around. There was a tax credit they wouldn't need anymore if it was just only a 4 to 6% instead of 13.8% increase, and a couple other things that were just very good sort of common sense thing. So the press is listening to this, and Zoe Saunders, the Ed Secretary, is talking it up. And at 2:59, we all get this press release from the Speaker of the House's office, from Joe Krawinski. And all hope died of a property tax break for all of us.
That's Jill, by the way, everybody, just in case you don't know what she looks like. That's the Speaker.
Oh, very good.
I'm pulling up a photo, yeah.
Okay. And I view this as sort of an act of, I don't know, I guess I won't try to characterize it, but I'll let you decide what it is. Here's what she said. At 2:59, as I wrote in my editorial today, Krawinski rained on our little parade, and she rained hard. Krawinski blamed the governor for the coming train wreck of unaffordability because, wait for it, the governor didn't attend the meeting in person. See, there was this meeting earlier in the day where Zoe Saunders, the Ed Secretary, and Speaker Krawinski and some others had a meeting and said, here's our plan. What Krawinski's response was, quote, he chose not to attend this meeting.
That's right.
First paragraph, he chose not to attend this meeting. His absence undermines the collaborative spirit necessary to address the critical issues facing our state. She goes on to, frankly, strain credulity by saying, the governor still has not provided any feasible alternative plan. Well, actually, it was a pretty specific 5-point plan. Not a bad plan. 5 points aren't good enough. The governor, and I quote, the governor proposed stripping kids of access to school meals. No. If they're using the federal plan, which for any kid who needs one can get one.
That's right.
Not a bad plan. Very generous funding of that. And then she said, Vermonters need tax relief, and our bill does this. Wow. Emphatically, no, it does not. What it does is it takes that $200 million extra that's needed, which would have been like a 20% tax increase, and cost shifts it. It takes the property tax goes down to 13.8%, but the way they do that is they create 2 entirely new taxes on Airbnbs and on software. So the Chronicle is going to cost more to produce because we use software, right?
Yeah.
And there's going to be taxes on that.
Or we could just change our IP addresses when we purchase them.
Ooh. Don't say that.
Sorry. Actually, sorry. We're not going to do that, guys.
No,
that was just a joke.
Yeah, some joke. Okay. And Krawinski then, she bookended her dismissal of our hopes of tax affordability there with took another peevish shot at Governor Scott. Said, quote, the governor has stated that he wanted to work together on this issue, but the fact that he did not show up to this meeting. It is impossible to see this is anything more than election year politics rather than a true commitment to collaboration. And I was thinking, what the Queen in Alice of Wonderland, scorn me, does he? Oh, he'll pay dearly for this. Just kind of a what? Because he didn't show up in person. He only sent his Secretary of Education and some other people. That was reason enough to say that, Paul, sorry, you don't deserve to pay 10% less in property taxes. Neither do I. Neither does anyone else. And really, it's us who will pay.
Well, it's just blatant projection is what it is. Saying because he wouldn't show up, he doesn't care.
Right.
It's like, oh, and it's just election year politics. Well, what you're doing right now with this statement that you're putting out is election year politics. And by the way, who is this master candidate you guys have lined up to run against Phil Scott? Who do you guys have? Nobody.
Yeah.
I don't know. It's just like, how could you claim that? It's just projection.
Maybe the politics she's worried about is that the governor has been saying he wants more centrist candidates running for the legislature. Maybe that's what scares her.
Well, I think it scares them a lot. I think that they realize that whether they want to accept it or not, they're going to have to deal with some promising candidates around the state. And I'm not saying they're even necessarily Republican, because they're not. It's just they're looking to get some different people in the door, and it needs to be done because Vermonters cannot afford this supermajority anymore. And to say that, like you say, I mean, potentially a 13% tax increase just because the governor didn't show up.
Yeah.
It's like, that's such a petty reason.
Petty's
it's like
a
little
good
kid
word.
Stuff. It's like middle schoolers type stuff.
Right.
It's like, you didn't show up.
Right. I'm going to take my bat and ball and go home.
That's right.
Yeah. And when we say, well, Vermonters will suffer, well, Paul, you and I have a mutual friend who rents and has got a good job, a wife who wants to stay home and raise their kids.
That's right.
And rents right now, and their rent, they have been told, because of this.
Yeah.
Their rent is going to jump by hundreds a month.
Yeah.
And how is that right? They're not getting any more value out of that. But someone in the state, of course, is getting that money, but the taxpayers, the renters, no, they're not.
No, and that's what's so frustrating is, as young Vermonters, for that matter, you have to wonder sometimes, like, are these people like crazy? Are they like out of their minds? Are they okay? Because I just don't understand how they don't see the choices that they're making and how it's really hurting people. Not just young Vermonters, by the way. You're talking also about older people that are on fixed incomes.
Yes.
Maybe they own their home. They can't afford to own their home anymore. They gotta, like my grandfather, he's got to sell his house and sayonara, right. As much as he maybe doesn't want to. But that's part of the reason that this state has just become so ridiculously unaffordable, and it just doesn't seem to have any end in sight. And it's
the end in sight. Well, I'm thinking, Paul, that after this latest stunt for some voters, the end in sight is going to be the August primary,
yeah,
and the November election, and that it can't come too soon. But in the meantime, on Monday, there's this veto session that Karwinski will insist that the supermajority flex its muscles. They're going to override the governor's veto of the school funding so-called reform bill. Peter Hirschfeld, who's is a Vermont public reporter who at these press conferences always seems to ask the most important question. I envy this skill.
He does.
He asked an administration official at this press availability what harm the 13.8% property tax increase would do. And there was this pause. And the person, I think it was Zoe Saunders, said, not being able to afford rent, increasing the homeless population, pushing more people into poverty, causing more people to leave the state. And, really, what a shame. This could have been avoided.
Yeah.
But it still could be if enough of the rank and file supermajoritarians actually say, we're liking the idea of getting reelected. And frankly, we don't think this is a very good idea. We think we should take this path forward to tax cuts. It could happen. the vote on this bill was really rather close when you look at it from certain angles. But that leadership will not be coming from Joe Kowinski, because really, what good is owning a supermajority if you can't show it off?
Well, exactly. I can't help but to wonder, though. Sometimes I said this like about the Burlington mayoral elections. Like, I think sometimes these folks seem to vote out of spite, almost. Like, no, Dad, you can't tell me what to do. You know, like that's my take on it.
Okay.
It's almost like a rebellion in some ways, and I almost have to wonder if the governor's team and their people realize this, and they're trying to push them to make maybe somewhat of a bad decision and expose themselves politically. And if they go ahead and override this veto, can't help but to think that's all the ammunition Governor Scott and his team are going to need. So if you want to talk about election year politics, maybe you should think about that. But that's just my humblest of opinions and commentary.
He has said pretty much, she's got the votes. They can override, and then the voters, they're going to get these big tax bills, and they're going to make up their own minds. So he's brought that up.
I guess they feel like they're so empowered that maybe it doesn't matter. But I can't help but to think that they're not.
Right.
At least everybody I speak to, and I don't live in Chittenden County, which, of course, is such a nice place because it's so close to Vermont. But anyways, sorry for that. What is that?
Ka-ching.
Ka-ching. Yeah. I heard that from a lawyer friend of mine earlier today. It made me laugh. But
so a lawyer friend. Okay. So, Paul, do we have any more comments?
Yes, we do. Big Siege writes, if Scott attended the meeting, Jill Korowici would have conjured another reason for not compromising. What do you got against witches?
Okay.
Michael Krasinski, he writes, the Vermont Democrats and progressives need to go. Vote them all out. Democrats are running as Republicans now, and they are desperate and flailing. That's Timothy who wrote that. Democrats are running as Republicans now. Timothy, I want an example. Vermont Democrats could have deregulated zoning laws to ease the construction of more housing, but they just want to tax everything. That's Mike Kaczynski. And then Barb Greck writes, retired teachers haven't seen a cost of living increase in years. I wonder if they are still borrowing from our retirement plan. Retired people are hurting, ! Let's see. Big Siege also writes, embrace and amplify is one way to combat bad policy on the other side. Scott Adams said something like that. And Vermont 4444. My son works for the City of Misery, BTV. His rent for a very small second-floor apartment is currently $1,800 a month, and the building is up for sale. It's not that fancy math to know that the rent will go up.
Wow, $1,800. There's this term that Joel Kotkin uses called rent surf. That when you're paying 2/3 of your income just for rent, you're a rent surf.
Yeah.
That place owns you.
That's right.
It's terrible.
It is terrible.
And one of the Mike Kaczynski mentioned about the Act 250 reform. Yeah, the governor at 1:16 in the morning this morning vetoed the Act 250 reform bill that essentially would say forget about the idea of housing anywhere outside of downtown areas. And even in the downtown areas, they have to jump through a lot of hoops. And he would say, and a lot of people say, just a death knell to the idea of really building more housing in Vermont.
Well, my favorite thing is when they call that bill a housing bill.
Yeah.
It's not a housing bill. It's not a housing bill at all. It's the opposite.
Right.
Timothy gave me an example of a Democrat running as a Republican, which I'm so silly for not thinking of this. Sorry. John Rogers.
Oh.
John Rogers, 16-year Democrat in the House, of 8 years in the House and 8 years in the Senate as a Democrat, running as a Republican for lieutenant governor. Sorry, I forgot about that.
Yeah.
And I interviewed him. So.
Good point. Well, our last story, main story that we're talking about. So one of the other bills that's up for veto is this renewable energy standard, which would basically fix that 70% of Vermont's electricity would have to come from in-state renewable power. In other words, it's an absolute gift to the solar power industry and also perhaps to the wind industry, but they've got problems of their own. But to the solar power industry in Vermont, not surprisingly, it's their trade groups that have successfully pushed this through. So just last week, though, Vermont's biggest solar power, its first and biggest solar installation company, it's called SunCommon.
That's right.
The parent company that owns SunCommon went belly up. They declared bankruptcy. Now, this was a company, SunCommon, that was started when two of the leaders of the Vermont Public Interest Research Group, a so-called environmental group, got a law passed that said if a solar company can get those solar panels up on the roof, utilities have to buy the power. There's no option. And they'll set their rate at 18, 25, 30 cents, whatever it is per kilowatt hour. Utilities have to buy it. Not surprised, and the market rate, of course, is depending on what the market rate is at the day is 3 times less, 4 times less than that amount. It's an unnaturally high rate of return that's guaranteed for the people who own those solar installations, whether it's on a roof or out in the field or whatever. So, very sweet deal. And this is going to shock you, Paul, but those guys, those two lobbyists who got that passed, they started a solar company called SunCommon.
That's right.
That made a ton of money.
Yeah.
Because when you are selling a product that the consumer is legally obliged to buy, no matter how much it costs, you do real well.
Sounds kind of corrupt, guy. I don't know.
Well, they're just saying, well, solar power saves the planet after all, and you got to pay a bit of a premium for saving the planet, don't you?
Well, that's if we agree that it saves the planet, actually. But
right, there is that. Yeah.
I do have a comment real quick on the solar
Sure.
panels. Big Siege writes, the solar panels on my house will pay for themselves in 45 years. I was told 15 years. Sad face. Yeah, well, you're not the only person I've heard that story from. I've also heard stories from people who had them installed and, they have leaks in their roof and the solar companies they're not liable for that. And there's just all these different issues.
Wow.
Yeah.
Leaks in the roof because,
the thing is, I'm not opposed to solar energy, like as an idea, especially if you are trying to live off grid. I think it's cool.
Yeah.
But I'm not shocked by this SunCommon's Sun. What is it? Sun-I?
It's iSun.
iSun. Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm not shocked by it at all. It definitely seems like this has been a problem waiting to happen.
Yeah.
But that's just my opinion.
Yeah.
So
what happened really was that besides the fact that they had to pay off the $40 million, and that costs money, but also Joe Biden's interest rates went up.
that's right.
And the Public Utilities Commission has been slowly reducing the amount of guaranteed required pay. It's still 2 or 3 times the market rate, but it's not 4 or 5 times the market rate. And so that has been slowly declining every year as it was meant to. So suddenly it costs more to put these things because of the higher interest rates and the rate of guaranteed return is less, and homeowners and other potential solar installers are going, they're getting sort of nervous about it, maybe kind of buyer's remorse. And so they're not, it's slowing down. The industry is slowing down. It's not tanking. It's not dying. But
I think the public
down.
perception of it is becoming increasingly critical, to say the very least. I think the public is saying, wait a minute, why are we, enforcing this? And Big Siege writes in again, it's called a racket. And it is somewhat of a racket, it seems. And it just seems like the public perception more than anything is starting to realize that.
Yeah.
So I didn't mean to cut you off there, Guy.
No, you didn't. No, and frankly, when someone has a comment, I'll shut up because I'd rather hear the comments. Thank you, Big Siege. But if these companies, after years of subsidized rates and tax breaks, for example, if I have a house that's worth $300,000 and I put $20,000 worth of solar panels on the roof, really that house is worth $320,000 now. But the tax assessors can't can't tax on the value of the solar panels. So I have a $320,000 home that I'm only paying $300,000 of tax on. This is just one of the wonderful tax breaks that the state of Vermont and the federal government, for that matter, gives for solar installation. And still, they're having trouble really turning a buck and making this thing fly. So the idea of mandating that our electricity is going to come primarily from one industry that, frankly, is financially problematic and is so reliant on all of these subsidies.
Belly up.
You got to wonder, is that such a smart idea to be doing that, having all of our power come from one industry that needs to have its hand held all the time by the ratepayers and by the government?
I do have some more comments. This is a good one. Latina Libertarian, love the name, writes, catastrophic ecological disasters in Congo for the mining of solar panel lithium and lithium batteries for quote-unquote climate solutions. That's a very valid point. People should look into that. And this is also happening in South America in a few different countries. Mike Kaczynski writes, guaranteed student loans allowed colleges to raise prices because the rise in costs would be covered by loans.
Good analogy.
And very similar, yeah. And similarly, the solar panel scheme is just making a few well-connected people wealthy on the backs of government. He also writes, nuclear power is the solution. David Kurtzetter agrees. Which guy, you might know something about that?
Yeah, I used to, as a lobbyist, I was trying to keep Vermont Yankee going. And see, the thing is, I figured I had a slam dunk case because I saw that everyone's hair was on fire about climate change, and I knew that nuclear power made carbon-free electricity.
That's right.
What's not to like? Well, as it turns out, what was really to hate was the fact that they were competing with the high-cost, variable output wind and solar industry. So they had to go. They were just too good at what they did.
You know, there was one time this last session when I was in the governor's office after a press conference. I went over to the governor and his people, and I was kind of pressing him about like the electric vehicle thing because I'm like, I know that he knows about vehicles, obviously, as a race car driver, and energy. And I'm like, Governor, I just don't see how this makes any sense. Like, these batteries are problematic. You know, you just saw, I think it was actually right after the eclipse when all those Teslas were lined up.
Oh, right.
Yeah, so it was like I was kind of just pressing him about it a little bit, and it was somewhat off the record. I guess I'm telling you guys about it now. And he told me, he said, you know, Paul, nuclear power could be a solution.
Right.
And I'm like, yeah, it might have to be. This just, the direction we're going just seems unrealistic, which I don't need. He doesn't need us to tell him that, I guess. Latina Libertarian writes, also, solar panels are toxic materials. Solar farms absorb so much heat, they create dangerous microclimate conditions like increased temperatures. That is true. I've heard of that out west. That's a pretty common occurrence in places like Arizona and California.
Huh. I hadn't heard that. Okay.
Let's see. There's a couple more. Solar panels heat the air, especially solar farms. This is Barb Greck, by the way. It affects the weather. It is a pollutant when they are smashed with hail and get old. Wind turbines are also hard to recycle, believe it or not. With Vermont so cloudy, it doesn't make sense. And it doesn't make sense. I think we get something like 90 days of sun a year. Full sun, that is. Right. And we have a few more comments. Let's see. Big Siege writes, Paul, you should do an episode covering the history of Vermont Yankee story. I'm not too familiar. We should do that, guy. That maybe that'd be fun for some people who don't know much about it. You probably know all about it. And Latina Libertarian writes again, anti-nuclear activists scream the same talking points from the 1970s stuck on China syndrome.
China syndrome.
China. I was going to say China syndrome and narrative and refused to understand advances in nuclear power. And I can attest to that. I have a friend who worked for the United States Navy, and he was a nuke on submarines, which that's what they call themselves, a nuke.
The Navy nukes.
The Navy nukes, exactly. And he would always say, like, it's so safe. It's so safe. They just, the people in the government. That's what makes me laugh about it, too, by the way, is the United States military, sure, why not? They can use nuclear power as much as they need. But no, not in Vermont. We can't do that. It's kind of strange, isn't it?
Yeah.
Anyway, just a thought.
So one last point of information. Tomorrow, on the State House lawn.
That's right.
At 1 o'clock, between 1 and 3 o'clock, there'll be a rally of all sorts of people who, for various reasons, want to see Governor Scott's vetoes upheld. Do not want them overridden by the legislature. And if you are of a mind, and if you want to go out and let people know, 1 to 3 o'clock and on the State House lawn, the steps of the State House, tomorrow, Saturday, June, oh boy.
Tomorrow's the 16th.
16th.
Or no, 15th.
15th.
Tomorrow's the 15th.
Thank you. June 15th. And I guess one last thing. I hope our Chronicle readers, if you missed it today, you'll take a good look at Colonel Dan Pipe's column on what Juneteenth means to white men. And Juneteenth, of course, is now a state holiday, and it's the day on which the last slave during the Civil War was set free. He was out in Texas somewhere. And he writes that even though it was white men who oppressed the slaves, it was also white men who freed the slaves and who gave up their lives and gave up everything, hundreds of thousands of men who said, I am going to fight in this war and end slavery. And my great-grandfather, he didn't die, but he lost his right arm. And there's a picture of him hanging up in the State House, actually, the one-armed governor. And at the first Battle of Bull Run in the Civil War, he cannonball decapitated the sergeant in front of him and took off his right arm. And so he literally gave his right arm to fight slavery, and he joined because he was anti-slavery. So let's remember on Juneteenth all the people of all colors who put an end to the horrific, evil practice of slavery. And that, I think, Paul, is our show. Do we have any last comments?
Yeah, just one more. Big Siege writes, 500,000 white men died over it. A lot of Vermonters, too, by the way.
Yes, the highest percentage of any state.
That's true.
Yeah.
And let's see, missed the date for the rally. Please repeat tomorrow at 1 p.m. on the State House lawn. And you know something, everyone? I think that's it. I think we need to wrap this up. Come on down to Beans Creamees. Come say hello. I'm about to open. If you guys want a little taste of summer, so come say hello. Anything else, Guy?
That's it. Thank you, Paul. Another great show. Love the studio. And I think I'm going to try to find myself a Green Mountain Boys battle flag.
I think I know where I can find you one.
Good.
Yes, I might know somebody named Rob Williams. But anyway.
Okay.
Anyway, thank you so much, everyone. Guy, you want to close it out?
I could sing the WKRP song, but I'll just say we'll see you again next Friday. Friday at 4. Thank you very much.